The delegation from Earth arrived late, not by any failure of technology or travel, but by design. The synesthetic Concord, the ruling body of 63 advanced civilizations, had invited humanity to their grand convergence on the orbiting citadel of Ethon 9. To them, humans were an anomaly, a primitive species with rudimentary propulsion and fractured governance, yet somehow capable of sending electromagnetic graffiti across the stars. For centuries, humanity had listened, and imagined, and waited. The Ethon Citadel was unlike anything constructed by human hands. It had no edges. It folded in on itself like a thought resolving into clarity. From a distance, it shimmered, its structure pulsing not with light, but conceptual gradients, a kind of visualized intent. Inside, the corridors sang in overlapping frequencies as envoys passed, each race communicating in its own native modality. Empathic field, scent ripple, spore cloud, acoustic lattice. But the humans, encased in thin pressure suits and carrying translators, walked through it all in silence. Their representative was not a politician, nor a scientist, but a linguist named Dr. Marilon. She had spent her life studying the structural boundaries of metaphor, irony, and narrative across Earth cultures. The Concord had requested an individual skilled in conceptual integrity, but they had no word for fiction, so Mara was what they got. Her first contact with the Concord's High Transmitter Council was nearly a diplomatic failure. They had difficulty parsing the idea of translation itself. To beings whose minds were networked from birth, the act of choosing one word over another seemed suspicious. When Mara explained that humans could say something without meaning it, jokes, hypotheses, poetry, the council paused for nearly 7 minutes, a silence so thick the chamber grew cold. Why would one generate deliberate falsehood? Asked Vyr Than, the gelatinous telepath from the Moeni cluster. To understand possibilities, Mara replied. This was not accepted. It was tolerated. The humans were granted probationary observer status, permitted to access the Citadel, but not to vote, trade, or disseminate media. Still, it was a foothold. And footholds, as Mara knew from human history, became doorways. Weeks passed. The humans behaved. They observed protocols. They shared nothing unsolicited, until someone left behind a book. It was an accident, at least as far as anyone could determine. A hardcover volume titled The Glass Paradox was found resting in the atmospheric buffer zone of Chamber 7. Printed on acid-free paper with subtle embossing and a deep indigo dust jacket, it had clearly been crafted with care. No data implants, no quantum encoding, just words. The Scifi were the first to read it. A species of crystalline neural webs, they experienced memory spatially. Memories physically formed tunnels and ridges within their own translucent skulls. Fiction struck them like a dimensional collapse. The book's central premise, a man wakes up in a world that isn't his own and must determine whether he's dreaming or dead, created a recursive fault in their memory lattice. One Scifi fractured completely. Others began quoting lines from the book during diplomatic sessions. Soon the Daxari, who communicated via shared ancestral dreams, caught wind of the phenomenon. They accessed the book not through vision or touch, but by placing it under their dreaming mats and absorbing its shape. The stories leaked into their cultural subconscious. A Daxari brood queen declared the Concord obsolete and tried to form a rebellion based on a quote from Chapter 5. Truth is a wall for those afraid to climb. Mara was summoned, not to be punished, but to explain. It's not a virus, she insisted, addressing a semicircle of representatives who radiated suspicion. It's a narrative, a construct, a pattern of invented meaning. But it isn't true, spat the HFY envoy, who smelled like copper and fear. No, said Mara. That's the point. What followed was chaos. Species that had lived in neural consensus for millennia began to diverge. Civil wars erupted between those who read and those who refused. The Arc-Sally, who stored knowledge as bio-etched shells, began carving entire volumes of invented myths and planting them like mines in historical archives. The Uluti, a once peaceful aquatic civilization, staged a mock invasion of their own capital, just to see what it would be like. They called it Imaginus, a thought plague, a mimetic hazard, a cognitive toxin. Earth was quarantined. The Citadel imposed full isolation. Humans were banned from all Concord systems. But the damage had already been done. In her forced exile aboard the ESS Voltaire, Mara monitored the transmission void. At first, nothing. Then fragments. A distress call encoded in iambic pentameter. A Daxari vessel trying to negotiate with its own AI through song lyrics. A Concord outpost broadcasting contradictory commands. Both surrender and retaliate, because both were symbolically appropriate. Reality had fractured along a human axis. You knew this would happen, said Commander Rhee, a Korean-Nigerian astrophysicist and former military pilot. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed unease. You gave him book. I left it behind, Mara said. Not gave. Same thing. You infected them. No, she replied. I offered them the mirror. Outside the ship, the stars pulsed silently, vast and oblivious. But inside the Concord, madness grew. The Concord's ruling species had no defense against fiction because they had never required one. Without lies, without metaphors, their minds had evolved in a straight line, free of shadows. They thought clarity was power. Now they saw that ambiguity could be sharper than any blade. And humanity, fractured, chaotic, prone to contradiction, had been forged in ambiguity for thousands of years. The very thing that made Earth weak was what made it dangerous. 3 weeks after Earth was exiled, the first Concord fleet fell silent. The ship was called Trellix Ascendant, a mobile city of 30,000 biological minds entangled in symphonic consciousness. It had orbited the twin moons of Kerolith for 2 centuries without incident, its inhabitants renowned for adjudicating conflicts through harmonized memory exchange. But now its song had stopped. When the recovery drones arrived, they found no damage to the hull, no radiation, no evidence of sabotage. The crew remained intact, alive, breathing, yet utterly inert. Eyes open, minds elsewhere. A single phrase had been etched into the command altar in glistening memory spores. What if this is not the only timeline? The question should have been harmless. A philosophical pebble in a cosmic ocean. But for the Concord, it was poison. They had never asked what if. Their minds were built on consensus and certainty. Even their mistakes were unanimously shared. The suggestion that reality could fork, that multiple outcomes might coexist, tore at the root of their unity. The plague was not biological. It was ontological, and it was spreading. Mara Elon stood at the edge of the ESS Voltaire's observation deck, watching coded flashes ripple across the edge of the black. These weren't distress signals. They were experiments. Alien civilizations running desperate simulations, trying to play out alternative futures using human logic frameworks. Their models were crude, their minds untrained. They were slipping into imagination without the safety of narrative tradition. And many were not coming back. Commander Rhee entered quietly, datapad in hand. 10 more Concord outposts have initiated blackout protocols, he said. One group is broadcasting fictional reenactments of ancient wars, trying to understand conflict by pretending to have lost. Another is building virtual environments that obey emotional logic instead of physical constants. They've started calling these spaces mirrors. Mirrors are only dangerous, Mara murmured, when you forget they aren't windows. Rhee looked at her. This isn't a mirror. It's a bomb. Mara didn't argue. Back on Earth, deep within a reconfigured orbital facility once slated for satellite defense, a new division had been activated. Officially, it was known as the Narrative Contingency Bureau. Unofficially, the Department of What If. Its members weren't generals. They weren't spies. They were novelists, theorists, psychologists, cinematic tacticians, and philosophical engineers. Their mission: construct predictive scenarios not based on hard data, but on emotional consequence, mythic archetypes, and counterfactual layering. For the first time, Earth's greatest weapon was not its soldiers, but its storytellers. A former screenwriter named Lila Sue designed a full psychological breakdown of a Concord hive species using a single narrative prompt. You are the hero, but your society forbids individual action. What do? The result: 10,000 drones broke collective formation and began acting as solo units. A Nigerian poet named Adamu Igil composed a metaphor so complex: the river that flows backwards has not defied gravity, only memory, that it caused a Concord AI to rewrite its knowledge framework and begin dreaming. Each case was recorded, analyzed, and improved. The weapon wasn't fiction alone. It was structured unreality. Back aboard the Voltaire, Mara received a signal. Not from Earth, not from the Concord, from within the Ethon Citadel, now sealed, fractured, and in diplomatic lockdown. The signal was encrypted in layers of contradictory syntax, a literary cipher designed to mislead any mind without metaphorical parsing. It began with a quote from the Glass Paradox. "You cannot wake from a dream, you do not know you're dreaming." And it was signed, in Scifi, Delegate S.H. Renvell, Severed Mind, 3 of 9. He had been declared unstable, disqualified from further diplomatic service. But the message was clear. There were survivors inside the Citadel trying to adapt. More disturbingly, they were trying to create fiction of their own. "They've started writing," Mara whispered, scanning the packet. Ree glanced over. "That's not good, is it?" "No," she replied. "It's worse. They don't know how to write badly yet. Every word is truth-shaped, but fiction-laced. Their minds are fusing contradictory schemas. That's not a story. That's a breach in consensual reality." The aliens had not evolved metaphorical resilience. Their neural integrity depended on internal coherence. Fiction wasn't stimulating for them. It was corrosive. Reactivated the Strategy Council. Emergency uplinks crackled. Representatives from Earth's underground fiction labs, cognitive defense specialists, and cultural containment officers joined the call. "What's the solution?" one analyst asked. "Do we try to retract all fictional concepts from Concord networks?" "Impossible," Mara said. "You can't unteach uncertainty. The only way out is forward." "So we teach them?" "No. We train them the way we train children. Slowly, ritualistically, safely, with narrative scaffolding. If they survive the transitional chaos, some may adapt. And if they don't?" Mara didn't speak for a moment. "They disintegrate. Not physically, not violently, but existentially. They'll become self-erasing. Thought forms too contradictory to cohere. Concepts without anchors." "You mean," Ree said slowly, "they'll become like us?" Mara turned to him. "No," she said. "They'll become the ghosts of what we used to be, a species before fiction, now unable to stop generating it." A plan was approved. The Voltaire would breach the quarantine. Inside Ethon 9, a neural lattice would be deployed, not to cure but to contain and coach. A simulation chamber encoded with human myths, paradoxes, epics, and children's tales. Species would enter and be gradually exposed to narrative unreality in calibrated doses. The goal wasn't elimination. It was mythological inoculation. And Mara would serve as the guide, the narrator prime. Her stories would become scaffolds for reassembled alien minds. 2 days later, the Voltaire folded space and arrived at the Citadel. It looked different now. Ethon 9 had unfolded. The once seamless structure was fragmenting, fractalizing into shapes not dictated by engineering but by aesthetic logic. Spires grew like metaphors reaching toward impossible conclusions. Windows changed size depending on who looked at them. One side of the Citadel flickered in day, the other in dream. Mara entered the main chamber alone. Delegates hovered, crawled, radiated, and stared, minds half lost, half liberated. She cleared her throat and activated the lattice. "I'm going to tell you a story," she said, not in English, but in symbolic cascade, a compressed language of emotional suggestion. "It's not true, but you'll feel like it is. That's the point. Let happen. Let make no sense. Let shape your fear and melt it." A projection bloomed. The story began simply. A lonely starfish falls in love with the concept of sunset. Several beings fled instantly. Others wept. One chanted equations of gravity in protest. Mara continued. As she spoke, some of them began to shift. Their membranes quivered, not from fear, but resonance. their minds bent without breaking. They began narrating themselves. "I am not who I was," said one. "I am a character in search of a frame," said another. And S.H. Rinvel, the fractured in Scifi, stepped forward and said, "We thought memory was sacred because it was shared, but now we see that possibility is sacred because it is not." Mara smiled. They were beginning to understand. Not what was, but what could be. In a newly born archive of echoed paths, a lattice chamber spun from fiction, metaphor, and recovered thought. Mara Elon watched as the delegates trembled under the weight of their own stories. What had once been the Ethon Citadel had transformed into something Earth had no name for. Not a cathedral, not a library, not a battlefield. It pulsed like a nervous system. Ideas moved here, not people. You could hear the war chants of long-extinct cultures reverberating in the walls. Fragments of human stories echoed in languages that had never had verbs before. It was working. Species that had fractured were slowly regaining structural selfhood, but altered, layered now with interpretive capacity. They spoke not in declarations, but in allegory. Some had even begun writing down events that never happened and debating their symbolic implications. Mara sat at the heart of it, voice hoarse from 100 narrations. The final session approached. One last story, one final fiction to stabilize the archive and end the plague. She chose an old tale, one told to her by her grandfather in a language that no longer existed outside of diaspora. A story of a bird who steals stars, hides them in nests woven from shadows, and teaches night to dream. As she spoke, she watched the minds in the chamber shift, accommodate, adapt. And then, one of them interrupted. Not with violence, with memory. "I have heard this story before," said a quiet voice. Mara turned. The speaker was not one of the active delegates. It was a being encased in pale gold skin, eyes flickering with starlight, a race she did not recognize. "Impossible," she said gently. "This story has never been recorded." "No," the being replied, stepping forward. "Not recorded. Remembered. We know it. All of it. The bird. The nest. The lie that makes the dark speak." The chamber fell silent. Others turned toward the speaker. "You are not from the Concord," Mara said carefully. "You've never shown yourselves." "We were never gone," the being replied. "We were forgotten. Or perhaps we erased ourselves." A symbol appeared above its head, not a language, but a shape that induced a kind of gravitational nausea. Memory bent around it. Mara took a step back. "You're not infected, are you?" she said. "No," the being said. "We are the origin, the first to create fiction, long before Earth, long before Concord unity." She felt cold down her spine. "Then where were you?" "Dissolved," it said. "Our civilization fell to fiction, as yours nearly did. We created too many selves, too many alternate futures. Our myths began to consume our memory. The real became an aftertaste." "And so you hid?" Mara asked. The being's voice grew softer. "We deleted ourselves from consensus space, wrote our story backwards, encoded warnings in the silence between stars. But your kind found the rhythm again, the shape of it." They paused, as if listening to a frequency she couldn't hear. "We thought fiction was a gift, then a weapon, then a disease. But now we see it is none of those." Mara's hands trembled. "What is it, then?" The being stared at her, not with menace, but with deep, alien pity. "It is a memory of something the universe itself forgot. Something we, and now you, were never meant to rediscover." Outside the archive, the Concord fleets circled uneasily. War had paused, but peace was fiction too, held together by invisible thread. Diplomats sent cautious envoys, now armed with narrative consultants, human advisors trained in mythic systems. Trade networks reopened, though the goods now included parables and seasonal storytelling rights. Earth had become indispensable and deeply feared. Mara Elon had been offered 1,000 honors. She accepted none. Instead, she returned to the ESS Voltaire, alone, her mind burning. The golden being's words haunted her. Something was wrong. 3 days into the journey home, a signal reached the Voltaire. It wasn't from the Concord. It wasn't from Earth. It was from the Voyager 2. The ancient Earth probe, launched centuries ago and long presumed dormant, had reactivated near the edge of Concord-controlled space. Its data was scrambled, but a core packet had survived. Mara accessed it. She expected nothing more than distorted audio, perhaps static. Instead, she found a transmission one Earth never sent. A children's story, one she heard before, word for word, the bird who steals stars. The same one she'd told in the archive. But this version was older, far older than her lifetime. And at the end of it, a human voice whispered, "The lie that remembers will awaken what dreams forgot." She felt the blood drain from her face. This was no coincidence. This was planted. Back on Earth, the Narrative Contingency Bureau had made a discovery of its own. Deep within a cave system in southern Africa, a series of prehistoric cave paintings had been carbon dated to 300,000 years ago, much older than any known symbolic system. But these weren't depictions of hunts or rituals. They were stories, sequential, symbolic, deliberately constructed arcs, beginning, middle, end. And at the heart of one panel, a bird, made of stars, a figure beside it, human-like but crowned in abstract flame. Not just fiction, fiction as memory. Mara convened a closed circle of humanity's top mythologists, linguists, and cognitive theorists. She laid out the findings. Fiction didn't begin with us, she said. It didn't evolve alongside tool use. It wasn't a mutation. It was installed, said Lila Sue, the screenwriter turned strategist. Seated. More than that, Mara said, it may not be a behavior. It may be a lockpick, something buried in us, hidden until triggered. Commander Ree leaned forward. By who? Not who, Mara said. What? The room fell still. The being on Ethon wasn't warning us about what we'd created, she continued. It was warning us what fiction remembers, what it holds in its metaphors. And what does it remember? Asked one pale voice from the shadows. Mara looked at the cave painting projected on the hollow wall. She touched the bird's wing. A mind too vast to store in reality. A presence so diffuse, it encoded itself in myths. Split itself into metaphors. Dreamed itself into us. Are you saying? I'm saying fiction isn't a tool, Mara said softly. It's a map of something trying to come back. In the cycles that followed, humanity did not retreat. They expanded. Carefully. Deliberately. They became the narrative custodians of the Concord, guiding alien civilizations through the slow adoption of metaphor, building mythos with training wheels. In time, species that once fractured at a joke began composing speculative epics. Children across worlds grew up hearing earthborn fairy tales. But Mara never forgot, and she never stopped listening, because in her dreams now, the bird of stars spoke back. Its voice was ancient, not malevolent, not divine, just familiar, like a long-lost self trying to return. And when she asked it what it wanted, it replied, only to be remembered, entire, at last, through you.